Imprint. In a white room, in a white ward, all is kindness. It saturates their looks, their words, their gestures. I have 4 mothers here. They touch my arm, hold my hand, fetch me tea, call me love. I wish they wouldn't. Now the ultrasound. For an instant, I think I see it. Momentary imprint, a spark of life in this neutrality.
C'est la nuit. Pluie. Les lumières du cinéma se répètent par terre. La foule sort, se disperse. Restent 2 femmes et un parapluie.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Poetry to Your Ears. Today we're joined by Millie.
Hello.
Hello. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, so your alias is Millie, but your full name is Kathryn Millington. And you're a poet, teacher, and careers advisor raised in Doncaster and based in Sheffield. You run 9 Lives Poetry, that's a charity and open mic night, bringing poetry to the people and nurturing emerging poets. And Millie has been shortlisted for the Britport Prize, and her claim to fame is that she was Toria Garbutt's English teacher.
Was.
And
yes.
you're the author of the pamphlet Imprints by Fun Press.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
hi Millie.
I can wave it. Look, there we are. There it is.
Also, you have you found the printed
Yes.
copy then.
Yes, I've got a printed copy, but this isn't what I read from. I normally read from. If I show you, this is like me writing ideas down for the questions. So when I perform, normally my poems are very large on the page. I have a book with them printed out really big so I can read them normally. So yeah, this is kind of tabbed up for knowing. This was from yesterday when I did a book launch, just so I knew which bonds I was reading.
Yeah.
But normally I read from like a book that I've handwritten my poems in, because I find that hard to read.
Yeah, and how did the book launch go? We were going to tune in. You did it online as well, didn't you?
I did, yeah. It was really good, I think. We did it online. One of the reasons was because my poems are about involuntary childlessness. There is a network called Gateway Women. There's like a kind of a website called it's called Lighthouse Women. It's like Facebook for involuntarily childless women. And a lot of the guys on there are in Australia and America and all over the place. So we thought, well, if we did it online, then they might be able to access it as well.
Did they?
So yeah, I enjoyed it anyway. So hopefully other people did as well. Yeah.
Yeah, did they tune in from that group?
Did they?
Yeah.
Yes, there were. Yeah, there were some people who did make it. Yeah, which is really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Has this been a long time coming, this publication?
How do you mean?
Has it taken quite a while to put it together, or did the publishing process happen quite fast?
Sorry, the sound went a bit weird then.
Did the publishing process go quite fast, quite rapid, or was it quite a while to come out?
It's hard to know because I've never done it before, but I think in terms of me writing the poems, I wrote the vast majority of the poems between 2021 and 2022. There are 2 in there that are much older, which are Imprint, which I'm reading later, and House Sitter. They were from 2012, 2013, and then the rest of them all kind of came in a bit of a sort of... So I'm miming a vomit there, which is not nice, is it really? But it kind of was a bit of a sort of poetic vomit, if there is such thing, onto the page. So I sent them to Scarlett at Fun Press in 2022 when her submission window was open. So it's been pretty quick, really, because she has an order that she wants to publish in, and there's obviously the editing process and everything. So yeah, it's been pretty fast, to be honest.
Yeah, less than a year. So have you started writing 10 years ago in 2012 or?
Yeah, so it was kind of then, yeah. we touched on my claim to fame as Toria Garbutt's English teacher. So I was an English teacher. I left teaching a long time ago, about 20 years ago now. But I've always worked with young people. I love working with young people, and I love the thing that I work for is that thing where someone just goes ding and they've got it. So I'm hoping to kind of do more teaching of creative writing and that kind of thing. But yeah, so I've always read poetry. I should say that as a disclaimer. I mean, it is true. I did write most of these from 2020 to 2022. But I've always read poetry. I've always loved poetry from being a kid, really. I went on an Arvin Foundation course in 2006, which is a long time ago, and it was a starting to write short stories and poetry course. And I was like, short stories. So I decided that I was going to be David Sedaris, if you've ever seen any of his work. He's an American short story writer. Check him out. He's very funny. His surname is Sedaris for sugar, David Sedaris. So yeah, he writes kind of vignettes about exciting moments in his life. He's a bit like Garrison Keillor, is that kind of writer. So I thought I was going to do that. And what actually happened was it was just poetry. Everything I wrote was, everything I was interested in was just poetry.
You didn't choose it chose you.
Yeah, kind of. And in like a classic poetry way, I then did nothing for 6 years, despite thinking I'd write something. So I went on a university. It was like a kind of access to creative writing course at a university, and that was where the poem Imprint comes from. So that was in 2012 when I wrote that poem. And House Sitter, originally, well, I'm not going to read that one, so it doesn't matter, but Imprint was written because my tutor told me I needed to explain the other poem more clearly, because the first poem that I wrote, which was about IVF, it was the first time I ever wrote about IVF.
So Imprint is kind of an extended explanation. It's kind of an expansion on what you did before.
Yeah, because there's imprint in the House Sitter, right? There's imprint.
Yes. Yeah. So the poem House Sitter existed first. So I wrote House Sitter after house sitting for somebody, like you're doing now. So we went to look after Tom, my husband's boss's house. It's a really lovely posh house in a place in Leeds called Adel, and the poem is just a true story, basically. Essentially what happened was the cats, they had a very, very hairy and a very old cat which was not allowed upstairs, and it went upstairs and it went in their daughter's bedroom. So I had to go into the bedroom to fetch the cat, and it was actually probably the first time I ever really, really wanted to have a child, was kind of when I went in that room. So the experience is from much longer ago than when I wrote the poem. But I wrote House Sitter. House Sitter's name was Imprint. That was the name of that poem originally. So I wrote about how it felt to go into a child's bedroom and it being quite an upsetting thing. And my tutor at the time said to me, a guy called Matt Clegg, who is a brilliant poet as well, said to me that he didn't really understand kind of what House Sitter was about. He wasn't quite getting it. And what he was trying to tell me was, I think, are you writing it for you or are you writing it for somebody else, kind of thing? Because if you're writing it for someone else, then it needs to be a bit clearer.
That's an interesting distinction there, because I think there'd be certain type of people who would say, well, you just write everything for yourself, and then what people glean, they glean. But you feel that maybe through conversations with your editor, that it is important to kind of put some breadcrumbs out there for the reader.
Yeah, I think it definitely is, because initially when I had the feedback from Matt about it, I just thought, well, sod you, I don't care anyway, it's not for you, is it? I was like, A, you're a man, so I'm not writing about you, and B, you don't get it, fine. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's not for you. So my reaction was quite like, I was quite annoyed by it, because I thought it was clear enough. There's a phrase in that particular poem that I use. I'm going to read a poem called For the Others on Mother's Day, and that poem uses the phrase a 2-week wait, and a 2-week wait is a technical IVF term for the time between when, if you have an embryo that's viable, so they want to give it a go, it's good enough quality to become a baby, they implant that into your womb, and then you have 2 weeks to wait, and then you have a pregnancy test after the 2 weeks, and at that point you know whether the embryo has stayed inside you. So House Sitter talks about me looking after a house, and there's a 2-week wait until the people come back to the house, kind of thing. So the 2-week wait bit it is quite a subtle thing, I think, to put in a poem.
That's actually what I was going to ask you about in that poem. Yeah. And I noticed that in some of your other poems as well, it's almost as like a motif, the 2-week time span. It's almost like you can start to measure your life in 2 weeks, 2-week increments.
But you have a glossary as well at the end of the pamphlet. Did that come after by the editor, or was it your idea?
It was my idea to have it in there because originally, after I wrote those 2 poems at university, back in sort of 2012, 2013ish, I then wrote nothing again until about 2021, and what happened was I'd written kind of nearly all of Imprint, and I managed to apply for some grant funding, so I was able to pay the author Helen Mort, which is Mort. If people don't know Helen, she's from Sheffield. She writes in all genres. She's incredible. So I was able to get a Sheffield Writers Grant to get Helen to mentor me to finish the pamphlet off. And we were playing with the idea of not telling people what the poems were about at all. So the glossary the glossary comes like right at the end of the book. And I think because of some of the quotations, I was lucky enough to get acknowledgements that very clearly specifically say that it's about childlessness. So I don't think we can kind of pretend that's not what it's about necessarily. And, I thought, should we let people guess what it's about, kind of thing. So that's where the glossary came from, because the explanations of the terms were originally at the end of the poems, whereas we kind of bundled them all up as you've noticed, and put them separately. So yeah, that was a kind of conscious thing.
We just want to take a moment to talk to you about Fawn Press, an indie press that publishes poetry that takes you by the hand and leads you into the woods. You can get 10% off all books on their website, www.fawnpress.co.uk, with the code POETRY10, as small letters, POETRY10. You will find the code and the link in the description below.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an unusual thing because the childless community, like the group Lighthouse Women, which I mentioned, and I'll say it now in case I forget later, that there are lots and lots and lots of sources of support. So if anyone is affected by anything I say, please do find me on Instagram and I can direct you to lots of people who can help you. So that's the most important thing. But I think because the community is underground, really, there are thousands and thousands of people on this site that I talk to on a daily basis. So it's a bit of a weird thing because they will know this. They know this. They know what it's about. They know what it's called. Because I've talked about it on there, and I've done things like this on there. But people who aren't affected by this won't see them because it's a private community. You have to apply to join, and you have to be at a very particular point in your journey, as well as someone who's tried to have children. Essentially, you have to have stopped trying, and you have to have decided that that's it. You are childless and you're not. So you can't be somebody who is thinking about adoption, for example. You can't be someone who is looking into fostering. You have to have come to the painful and, horrible conclusion in a lot of ways that that's it. You're not going to have children in your life. You have to be there before you can join, because it's really important not to trigger other people and not to upset other people who are there. And if somebody starts saying, oh, actually, I went to a conference on adoption the other day and I think everybody should adopt, that would instantly upset most of the people in there. So it's a very carefully curated thing. So yeah, I mean, from a kind of purely, from a genuine hand-on-heart point of view, I would never have imagined in a million years that I would get people like Helen and Benjamin Zephaniah and Wendy Pratt and Chris Lanyon. I would never have imagined I would get people saying stuff like that about it in the first place, in terms of the quotes and things. I really didn't expect that. So in my mind, it was just going to be like, something like this, not much on the back. I didn't even think it was going to be published, to be honest. I was purely thinking, do I just want to be a performance person and just perform and just hope that I can get a following that way, or self-publish it was the other option I was considering. So I really didn't think that it would get published in the way that it has been. So I'd love to say we planned it all out and everything, like where the footnotes are and that kind of thing, but it's just all been a bit of a happy accident, really, I guess.
I'm intrigued in your story when you said you did a creative writing course and then you stopped writing and then you went back to it, and most of the poems are from 2020. And I think, can you tell us more about how you started writing again and performing and that part, and what made you want to put a pamphlet together on childlessness?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I did was that I think I always knew that I had something. So when I wrote Imprint and House Sitter, and I wrote other poems as well at the same time. So because it was a poetry module within a creative writing course that I did for a year. So I wrote about my family, I wrote about like the death of my father-in-law, I wrote about love, I wrote about being afraid to be a poet. I've got a poem about that, and then I stopped writing. So I knew that Imprint, when people read it, they kind of went, oh, okay. So I sent that off to the Bridport Prize, and as I put in my biography, I got shortlisted for that, which was, I think it was longlisted actually. I think I might have phrased it wrong. I was in the group that was read, so they were like the top 80 poems or whatever of the thousands that went in. It was actually read by somebody, which is amazing for me, and it's changed since then as well. So anyway, so the fact that somebody said it was any good made me think, oh, okay, maybe I should try and take this more seriously. And I was fortunate that I had a friend who was part of a writing collective who were online. It's called the Scribblers Union. It doesn't run anymore, but it was originally started in Glasgow by a poet called Kevin P. Gilday, who's brilliant. So I joined that and just started doing exercises again and writing again and looking around me again and thinking. And every time that we finished a term, in the Scribblers Union, like a 6-week term, it would end with a performance. So you would perform something that you'd written during those 6 weeks. So I did 3 kind of cycles of it. So I got 3 sort of poems from that, I suppose. Does that help? I've completely forgotten the question. Sorry.
Is that where you met Michael Peterson?
No.
Sorry?
Is that where you met Michael Peterson?
At Scribblers Union? No, it wasn't actually. No, I met Michael. I went to see Michael read, and I took. I don't have her with me, so I can't show you. But for my poetry night, it's run by a cat puppet. I might go and get her in a minute if I can. But and I went to see Michael with my cat puppet because I've seen Michael before. I love Michael. Michael's one of the best poets there is in my view. I love his work so much.
We just met him in Bristol.
Yeah. You are, sorry?
We just met him in Bristol, actually. Yeah.
Did you? Oh God, he's God, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's like my sort of wackier younger brother, I think. Yeah. I mean wackier because his hair is even big. Mine's flattened today. We have the same hair, but he's a lot taller and much more glamorous and much more successful and better looking than me as well. But no, I love Michael. No, I specifically went to see Michael with my cat puppet because I thought I bet he'll come and play my poetry night, and he did. So yeah, it wasn't through Scribblers, but yeah. So Scribblers Union really helped me because I knew every week we would be writing a poem. So I did the classic thing that writers, if we do that question, I mean, I'll flash this at you because it's very weird, but like this is me writing my ideas down in the middle of the night. So this is like the beginning of some sort of a. It's not really a poem. It's an idea for a poem kind of thing. But because I was part of a writing collective, every time I had an idea, I actually wrote it down instead of thinking, oh, I'll remember it later. So I ended up with a load of images and a load of ideas that became the poems in the book as a result of being part of Scribblers. The other thing that I did as well was I did an Arvin Foundation course again, which was online, one with Yomi Sode and Joelle Taylor, which was a performance poetry course, which was just like... So for the others, on Mother's Day is the poem that I wrote on that course. That was like the thing that came out of that for me. So yeah, so it was kind of... I think lockdown had a big part to play in it because we were obviously all doing this kind of thing in lockdown. But I think the Bridport thing, and then when I did the poem, when I did for the others, for Joelle, she was quite moved by it, and I thought, oh, okay, that must be a good poem then. So I suppose my confidence and my kind of self-belief was growing very, very, very small ways, but during that whole time period, I guess.
Can you read us that one?
Do you want me to read that one?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, yeah, great. So I'll just go and find it. This is from 2021, I think it was when I wrote this. Yeah. And I did write it on Mother's Day. In the childless community, we call Mother's Day Others' Day because that's how we feel. We feel othered by it. So for the others on Mother's Day, you ask me if, and then you ask me why. Why I didn't have, why I wouldn't have, why I couldn't have. You ask as though there's an answer, a distinction, a hierarchy of grief to arrange your face for. Let me show you. The airlocked lunchbox I hid my syringes in, the brightly lit toilets I injected in between the meeting and the night out, between the next course and the last bus, between everyone else and the two of us. Let me show you. The needle marks between my umbilical wound and my always empty womb. Let me tell you about summer 2012, the 2-week wait I spent at home, watching those technicolor goddesses running and jumping and swimming, those women. Oh, how they made their bodies fly when I couldn't keep a cell in mine. Sometimes I think I didn't try. My counsellor said, the best way to answer is sadly not. Not sadly, sadly not. Sadly, the knot untied didn't meet the right girl or right guy. It is not a choice to have a terrible upbringing or to be too scared of repetition or to fear the halt of the pulse inside you or to be too afraid of the one beside you or to be too poor to continue to try to. Let me show you how we drown our reasons into one. We are no body of water. We are groundwater. We pool, form rock-bound aquifer. We seep through convenient cracks in the tarmac. Your face. Do you think you've got it right? Let me take you to the Mac makeover booth. Try the number 1, the Audrey, the averted eye, resilient lip and angle to hold your head at. The number 2, the Princess Di, with black coal around your eyes so that everyone can see you cry. What's wrong? Not want to be categorised. So come, drown in us, if you like. Thanks.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Your performance really adds a dimension to that poem as well, because we've read it, and it seems to me like you've built up a way of doing it from performing it live, but it really adds a different feeling from it.
Yeah, and in the written version, there's that one line that takes a whole page, which is sometimes I think I didn't try.
Yeah.
How do you navigate between having a poem for performance and then putting it for the page to be read for the page?
I think a lot of my poems come from one idea that I've had, and they kind of spread outwards, I suppose. So I think I'd never studied performance poetry before I did the course with Joelle and Yomi. I don't really like the distinction. I don't know. I do. If it makes you happy, then I like it. Do you know what I mean? If it's good for you, then that's great. I think poetry is just poetry. I don't really like the idea of page poetry and performance, because I think there seems to be a bit of snobbery sometimes between one thing being, better than the others. It's like the Oscars or poetry prizes or anything like that. I'm not a big fan of prizes and kind of not prizes, but just judgments. I'm a big fan of prizes. Oh, I'd love some prizes, but mostly for like neat handwriting. That would be my idea of a good prize. But I think when you're pitting things against each other, I suppose the competition isn't healthy. So I didn't know. Like Joelle and Yomi showed us poems. Like Danez Smith has an incredible poem. They called it Heaven for Black Boys when in the clip that we saw, but I know it has a lot of other names. And we watched it, and it was the way I never realised that the poems kind of build and they build and they build and they build and they do that, and then they come down and then they come down, so I didn't realise about the kind of dynamics, the ebb and the flow of performance poetry until I did the course, really. So there's sometimes I think I didn't try is on a page on its own, because there's probably maybe 3 or 4 lines in imprint that I still find really hard to say, and that's one of them, because it makes me really sad, because I should have said at the start as well, I'm doing all right nowadays. I couldn't sit here and do this if I wasn't, I'm a long way along the journey of the kind of grief cycle of involuntary childlessness, but I did. I did think I didn't try. I thought I didn't try hard enough, that if I'd have tried harder, it would have worked for me, that somehow, I could have made myself pregnant just by wanting to be pregnant. And obviously, it wasn't my fault, but I thought it was. I thought, the Technicolor goddesses that I refer to in those poems, it's London 2012, so I was ironically sat at home watching the Olympics when I was waiting. Just in the aftermath actually of the not becoming pregnant, so I just sat and cried all the way through it, and it was happy tears sometimes, like I was so happy for them, that they were winning things. It was so exciting. You kind of drew a
comparison between kind of like physical feats in terms of like them, what they could do in the Olympics with their bodies, like you say, and you kind of draw in a comparison with your own physicality in that way.
Yeah, because it wouldn't stay. My therapist used to say, because you get a therapist when you do IVF and afterwards, whether it works or it doesn't, I think, but anyway, I had one afterwards because it hadn't, and she said to me that I had to imagine my womb. This is when I was trying. So when I was trying, my therapist said you have to imagine your womb as being like a harbour, and the water's really calm and it's a really nice place, and this egg's going to come in and it's going to stay there and sort of become a baby kind of thing. And for me, it was just, I couldn't imagine that. I couldn't see that. I just kept seeing like waves crashing everywhere and the boats becoming unmoored, or I couldn't go with that image because it didn't really feel like it was going to work. And I think that's where sometimes I think I didn't try comes from, because when you do something because you don't think there's going to be a good outcome, but you do it anyway, which we did because we were just so desperate, that we thought, well, we'll try. But right from the start, I didn't believe that I was ever going to become pregnant, and indeed I didn't. So yeah, it's a very difficult line, that one. So that's why it's on its own, because I think for a lot of women as well, there is this thing about IVF, because the poem is a lot about IVF. There's the needles, there's the puncture marks, there's all that sort of stuff. Some people think that if you didn't have 14 rounds of IVF, or if you didn't bankrupt yourself, like when I'm saying, it's not a crime to be too poor to continue to try to, I just mean, it costs a lot of money to do IVF. And you feel like I had 2 rounds because one of them just failed completely and I didn't get any eggs at all. And then the second round we got 2 eggs, which is really, really, really low. You would normally have at least double figures of viable eggs that you could try to make a child with. So I only had 2 rounds, and I say I only had because I still feel like I didn't have 14 rounds. I didn't keep kind of, hitting myself against that wall. And I was very lucky because I had a specialist who's a very, very moral, very good person, who said that it would be unethical if we treat you anymore because you've got less than 5% chance basically of becoming pregnant this way. So they were saying you either use donor eggs or donor sperm, or you adopt. They were like, those are your choices. You can't have a baby. It's very, very unlikely. So. But yeah, there's still this little voice in my head that goes, well, if I'd have started when I was 25, or if so it's very hard to kind of just go, look, you did your best, you tried your best, and your best is good enough. It is good enough, but you still feel as a woman, I think, if you don't have a baby, then why not? Why didn't you adopt one then? There is that feeling, for me anyway. Yeah,
and of course you have a poem in the collection about that as well, about people, asking about adoption.
Yes, have you thought about adoption? Yeah. The answer is yes. Okay, not in a nasty way, but if you ever think of asking that question to somebody, don't ask them,
because there's kind of a prompt. There's kind of a prompt inherent in that question as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I've been asked that question by so many really genuinely lovely. Some of my favourite people in the world have asked me that question, and it's just for a lot of people, it's the kindness. It's them kind of thinking, oh my God, it's so awful. How can I help? How can I make it better? But the answer is just, not by saying that. Just let the person, if they want to talk to you, they will. I wouldn't. I could talk to people about it now if they want to talk to me about it. I mean, If I'm not doing something like this, then I generally wouldn't tell the whole room about my life experiences. People have to be, there has to be a reason for me to do it. Like if I think I'm going to help somebody, then fine, I'll do it. But otherwise, I would generally rather talk about other things because, that was, well, it depends on the situation, doesn't it? But I don't generally go on about it in public.
And yeah, so how does poetry as a genre of expression allow you to communicate about this experience differently?
Yeah, I'm just looking for my notes because I wrote down some ideas about this one. It's a really
sounds like Millie's question. A natural poet, because it sounds like everything you write comes out as poetry.
It's a very flattering thing of you to say. I think what I've written down here in my beautiful handwriting is that I think poetry. I've got a line in a poem called "This is Disenfranchised Grief" that goes, "You're the invisibility, and also the cloak, the choking constriction, the lump in the throat." So it's kind of like being the invisibility and also the cloak. So I think that poetry allows you to say things that are unsayable to people who can hear them. So I think being the invisibility and the cloak, it's kind of like, you can hear, if you want to hear what that particular poem is about, you'll hear it. But I'm not necessarily going to get right up in your face and go, this poem is saying this, because poetry doesn't do that. Poetry is gentler than that. And I think you know, you can have, I think poetry kind of cuts through the sort of, I can't think of a better word, swearing alert bullshit, just cuts through things just very easily. And I think you can have one image, like I talk about, have you thought about adoption? Your question's like a shotgun suddenly pointed at my throat, and when I perform that, I do that when I'm talking, because it's upsetting for people. And I think you can have one image like that can bring lots of emotions to people. So someone might feel quite angry for me, somebody might feel quite sad for me if they were associating with the feeling. Somebody else who'd asked that question and maybe has got children might actually think, oh, okay, I understand why I shouldn't ask that question now. So I think you can have one image that can do so many different things. And I think the last thing I think with poetry, because of the way that poetry is taught at school, you pay attention. Or at least I always did. Like when I was a kid, we used to have like story time, and we all used to sit and we'd be really quiet and we'd listen. And I think with poetry, unlike with prose, I feel like if it's a fiction text, then there's a lot of stuff going on in fiction. You know, there's a lot of descriptions of things, where the characters are and what the characters look like and all that kind of stuff, which is great. I love fiction. I'm a huge reader of anything. But with poetry, you don't get that. You've got somebody kind of leaning in really closely to you and just sort of whispering something to you and just saying, can you hear this? Can you see it? Can you touch it? Can you understand it? It's a very kind of intimate way of writing, I think. I think that's why I like it.
Non-tangible. You have to use your imagination to fill in a lot of the ambiguities. And it's one of the strengths of poetry as well. But sometimes for maybe beginners, it's a little bit more difficult when you're thinking literally. You know, when you're saying, okay, well, there's that kind of frustration with students when they're learning poetry, where it's like, what is it about? Just tell me what it's about.
Yeah, just tell me what it is so I can write it down and get a C.
I want to know the answer.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember being that teacher. It's like, well, it's about this if you want, but you know, I don't really want to tell you what it's about because I might be wrong, you know.
Yeah. It puts you in that active listening position when it's not obvious and you just hear about the person's experience. And there's not a lot of other spaces where that happens, you know. Usually, even if you talk about something in like an activist way, for example, or you know, a statement is kind of meant for a dialogue, like a reaction. Yeah. Where I would say poems, just you take it in and then it's more about the listening.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of like film. I mean, I did my degrees in American literature and history and politics and film. And when I did film, I never understood. There's this thing called mise en scène, which is like the term that they use for like how a character is dressed or the room that a character is in, or you know, so everything in a film. I never realised until I studied it, like everything is meant, you know, like someone, like I'm wearing green, you know, because I don't know, I'm mocking the fact that I can't have children, or I'm wearing a fertile colour, or this is a bit like scales on a fish, so maybe I'm a mermaid and I'm kind of like, you know, bringing you onto the rocks, or, and you know, and I mean it isn't, it's literally, I actually wanted to wear something else, but it was really creased, so I put this on instead, but in a film it's like everything, you know, is deliberate, like the length of the shot, whether it's a close-up, whether it's a... So I think poetry is very much like that. It's like everything is meant, everything is deliberate, and you can enjoy it without knowing the person's intention. So with some of my poems, people have said some things to me about them, and I've gone, oh, okay, yeah, that's nice. You know, that wasn't what I meant when I wrote it necessarily, but I love the fact that there's enough ambiguity there for people to see things that I didn't consciously put there. You know, there is a lot of unconscious and subconscious things, I think, in poetry generally, that you didn't necessarily mean it when you wrote it, but now it, you know, or even time moving on.
I found that with my writing. I found that with my writing as well. Yeah. When you look back years later, you say, oh, maybe I did mean something there. Like the subconscious, and that's a strange phenomenon to me, because you kind of think you intend everything.
Yeah, you definitely, and particularly when you're writing, because it's very much like, you've got a pen or you've got your keyboard, and your intention is very strong to say something, but later on you might find out that wasn't what you meant to say. I mean, I've certainly written poems where at the time I thought a lot of what I was describing in that poem was okay, and then years later I've read it and gone, I was clearly not behaving properly there, or I wasn't very well when I did that, or so yeah, it is interesting how things change over time.
I think for me as well, a strength of poetry is that it doesn't have to be necessarily kind of morally correct all the time. I say to Éloïse all the time that a poetry kind of captures how someone feels, right? It's an expression of like passion and feeling and emotion, and compared to, for example, when people make political points or moral points, we're always kind of checking to make sure something's correct. We're always kind of like, we find outrage if something's wrong.
You try to do like a universal statement that encompasses everything that you think. Whereas in poetry, you can think, okay, I'm writing this from a place of anger. That doesn't mean I agree with it, almost,
Yeah, you can adopt a position, but not kind of, definitely.
And I think that is what helps people be more frank when they perform poetry, when they write poetry as well, because they don't feel the same burden to be 100% morally correct in everything they say. But of course, there's a flip side to that, which is, if somebody writes poetry that is like, people find it abhorrent, there's still going to be a reaction to that, right? There's still going to be people who say, oh, we don't want you to say that. Yeah. So there is a limit, but I think people feel a bit freer to express themselves in poetry.
Yeah. Definitely. It is really interesting. I could carry on. I'm thinking about all kinds of like horror films and things like that now, and the way that horror films do that, but I'll not go there.
That's really interesting. But,
I mean, I can go there, but
how horror films express kind of people's darkest desires and fears and worries.
Yeah.
It's almost like
for
a
me, I was thinking of, it's the transgressive element of it, I suppose. It's the kind of like, we're going to do this thing and we're all playing along, and we know, we're going, woo, we're trying to scare you. But with films like with Carrie, if you've ever seen that, have you seen Carrie?
Yeah, the Stephen King adaptation.
Yeah, so there's and the same with Ring, actually, with Ring or The Ring or Ringu or whatever you like to call it. There's
the Japanese one or the English one?
Yeah, the Japanese one for me, but you can tell that just by looking at me, probably. Cheesy Guardian reading person that I am. But there's a moment in both those films where something comes into, so... I don't want to do spoilers, so if people haven't seen Carrie, stick your fingers in your ears. But at the end of Carrie, the main kind of the kindest, loveliest character who does try to actually help Carrie has a nightmare where she goes to the grave and it says Carrie burn in hell or something on this gravestone, and she stood there and it's all like la 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 la, and it's very lovely and soft focus, and then this hand comes like out of the grave to try and grab her. And it's the same as in The Ring, the Sada Poe, the really terrifying creature in that, actually comes up to the telly and I'm not going to do it, but gets closer and closer and closer and closer, and then actually climbs out of the TV into the room. And it's things like that. I think poetry can do that. I think people think that poetry is this really like, Shakespearean didum kind of thing, and actually poetry can really like, it could really shock you if you're prepared to sit and let it, in a way that I think a lot of, I mean, most good art can. There are a lot of songs that the lyrics sound like the singer is saying one thing and actually they're saying the other. There's a lot of double meaning, I think, but I do think poetry is particularly good at kind of puncturing something suddenly, and you think you're getting, a lovely vanilla ice cream, and you're actually getting some butter that's been shaped onto a cone, and you're like, this is not what I paid for. I think sorry, this is my brain.
Oh my God, just imagine licking that. Oh my God.
How unpleasant would that be?
Drinking water and it being
that
vodka,
deserves its poem, yeah.
Yeah, particularly if it was like earwax flavoured butter or just something like that. Anyway, enough facial expressions.
Yeah, I mean, there's some, I think, like, attractions in Japan where everything is not what it seems to be. Like,
oh, clever.
Like,
yeah.
you'll walk in the cereal aisle and then they're all cushions, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying listening to this episode. This episode is sponsored by Write Bloody UK. They're an independent publisher that publishes bloody beautiful poetry books. You get 10% off all books on their website, writebbloodyuk.co.uk, with the code Poetry to Your Ears. That's 10% off with the code Poetry to Your Ears on the website, writebbloodyuk.co.uk. Hope you enjoy it.
Some poetry?
Yeah, do you want to read?
Well, if we must. You know.
Would you like to read? This is Disenfranchised Grief.
I think you said you wanted me just to explain the term before I read it. So disenfranchised grief is it's a thing. So when I say that, I mean people have written PhDs about it. There's published literature about it. It's a psychological term that was coined by a guy called Ken Doka, which is D-O-K-A. And disenfranchised, I mean, everybody knows grief, I think. The disenfranchised part of it is that you're not allowed to demonstrate this grief. It's something that you can't show in public, is the way that I'm taking it. So, for example, I had a cat called Atticus, who died a couple of years ago now. He was the worst cat in the world. He used to swipe, he used to hide under sofas, he used to go like whenever you came near him, but I still cried like a baby in the car park of the vets when he died, because it was really sad. But if I'd have gone to work and cried at work like that, people would have just been like, oh, it's only a cat. And for some people, their pets are the thing they love most in the world, you know. So there's that example, and then another example would be if you are in a relationship with somebody and the culture that you're in doesn't either allow that relationship or value that relationship. So obviously some cultures, you can't love people of the same sex, for example, or it might be that you're having an affair with somebody and they die, and you're obviously not able to show that grief in public because you shouldn't be doing it anyway, kind of thing. So disenfranchised grief is grief that isn't sort of publicly acknowledged or acceptable. Right, that was a very long explanation. Sorry, I should add as well, I'm just looking in my book because this poem is a collaborative poem. So I asked, this was Mother's Day 2022, and I asked women on the private site that I've talked about to tell me how their disenfranchised grief felt when it was at its most painful. And then I turned that into a poem trying to explain what the feeling feels like to people. So I'd like to just credit the women who contributed. There were a lot of women, not all of them want to be named. So the ones that have allowed me to use their names are Fiona, Hazel, Louise Watson and Sarah Markham. So they're also the authors of this poem. This is Disenfranchised Grief. You've heard of grief. Imagine you can't say, I miss my mum, my dad, my gran, or similar, every day because nobody openly feels like that and they push you away. This is disenfranchised grief. Imagine chatting cosy with a brand new tribe of women, stories of birth, that tide of love, the joy that's worth the ruin. One of them hides her scars and prays to free her inner screaming. This is disenfranchised grief. Imagine being lost inside an endless wood, tall trees like grown-up children. The path is motherhood, but the saplings are not yours, so you stumble through the mud. This is disenfranchised grief. You're the slug at your family's salt-flinging party. You're the viewpoint dismissed by the Twitterati. You're the nail-tattooed palm at the pregnancy announcement. Your movement in the symphony of womanhood is dissonant. You're the mad woman in the attic, the girl on the train. Career woman, black widow, you don't have a name. You're pitiful like Cat Lady or scorned like Poor Jen. You're every witch that ever died for living just like men. You're the invisibility and yet also the cloak. You're the choking constriction, the lump in the throat. You're lying in the road but the traffic hasn't stopped. You're falling down a chasm with no limit to the drop. This is disenfranchised grief. Imagine that wherever you go, it is the blackest night, and even when it's time to sleep, there's no chance of respite. The escape hatch is rusted shut. You're weighed down by this fight. This is disenfranchised grief. Imagine that your body is a cast you drag around. Inside is dust-drowned space, a fly tip, a dumping ground. You wish someone would come and burn this debris down. This is disenfranchised grief. Imagine that it's spring, everybody's favourite season. Everywhere spills life from the sky, the ground protean. You cry when you see lambs, and you cannot say the reason. This is disenfranchised grief. It's the stinging, it's the stalling, it's those natural instincts calling, the paralysis, the falling, it's the bruises that don't fade, it's the choices you can't make, it's the tearing, blistering ache, it's the bones that won't heal, it's the feelings you can't feel, it's the toys that you can't buy or the clothes that make you cry, it's the names that you can't say, it's the future that lurks unmade. This is disenfranchised grief. Thank you.
It's an incredibly powerful poem.
Thanks. I'm just leaning over here for a minute. Just going off stage there. Hello, I'm back now.
so dense with
so many metaphors.
I've never been called dense before. Thank you.
Not the insult one.
No, I like it.
Yeah,
I know what you mean. It's fine.
Yeah, just so jam-packed with.
Yeah, I just love all
heavy emotion.
The metaphors to express what it is, and it's almost like every metaphor could be its own poem.
Yes.
You know, you could take a line and just think what would happen in that reality. You're the cloak and the invisibility in the cloak. Let's write a poem about that. You know, be a good
I went off down a crazy train of thought just trying to think about that the other day. I was like, well, how could it be both and how would that work? And that was about 2 hours of my time just sitting going.
Yeah. I mean, it's a powerful poem in the sense of naming emotions that don't have names as well. It works as a poem that tries to put a name to something that you can't name as well. It's kind of you're centering around it. You're trying to hone in on a feeling.
Yeah, because the name is grief, you see, and that's the main thing that I learned in everything was that it's grief. That's all it is. It's grief. It's just that people don't understand. Like I once read a really nice description about grief being like a rock, like a great big rock that someone's just dumped in the middle of your bedroom, and initially it's like you sort of squeeze around the edge of it because you don't want to hurt yourself on it, and it's in the way and it stops you from getting over to the other side of the room, and you spend all your time going around the outside of it. And then when you're getting maybe a little bit stronger, you start kind of just, you know, maybe crawling over it or putting something on it so that you can step over it, and it becomes as though in the end with the rock, I think the idea is that you might just have a picnic on it, or you might chuck some cushions on it and make it into an accessory. But you know, the grief that you feel, it becomes part of you. You know, like it's part of the room.
Little segue there from Cat Lady to Nan Know's poetry. you want to tell us?
Yes, that was a bit of an in-joke, yeah.
9 Lives Poetry is the name of the poetry now?
Yeah, so 9 Lives is... so Nine Lives started out, it's a spoken word poetry night in Sheffield, where I live in South Yorkshire. So I started it up because I performed, which one was it? It was for the others on Mother's Day at the Huddersfield Literary Festival. They do a poetry slam. I don't know how much slamming you guys do, but it was the first time I'd ever done a poetry slam. Will people be familiar with that term, or
yeah,
I don't need to explain it or anything?
People are pretty familiar at this point with poetry slam.
Yeah, I didn't explain it the other day, and then someone was like, I had no idea what you're talking about, so that's cool. So I did a slam because I thought it would be interesting just to try that kind of performance. And it was run by a lady called Rose Kondo. That's Condo, and she's a poet. She's a brilliant poet. And it was the most supportive, loveliest poetry slam in the known universe. Everyone was so kind. It was a really lovely vibe. It was wonderful, really nice experience.
Were you expecting it to be a bit more competitive, a bit more...
Well, I think some slams are. I think it depends on the slam vibes, and some people really like that. So, like you get like a rap battle or something, like an 8 Mile or whatever, or just generally in hip hop, where everyone's like, oh, let's have some wordplay and let's take each other on kind of thing. That would be my idea of hell. I would really not, or at least not at the moment, because my stuff's not like that. I don't have any. I do have. I think there's definitely one joke in imprint. There may be 2, but there are not very many jokes in my stuff at the moment. So the adversarial nature of it, I suppose, varies depending on the slam you choose to go to.
Yeah, there's a big advantage to kind of using humour live. I think I think it gets people on your side.
And I guess like with a lot of comedians, when they get heckled and stuff, I guess you probably have some comebacks that you already know and you can use, and I'm sure there's a real art to it. But for me, slamming at the Huddersfield Literary Festival, it was a lovely experience, but I came away from it thinking, I don't think it's right for me, and I need something.
Interesting. What was it about it that wasn't quite?
It was because of the nature of my work, I think, because what I was doing was, and because my night is an open mic night, so I specifically wanted an open mic night that somebody like me would perform at. So I did the be the change you want to see in the world thing. I thought, okay, it doesn't exist in Sheffield, because it didn't at the time. So I made one. But the thing about the slam that got me, it was really just my own work. It was because I'd stood up on a stage and said a lot of very, very upsetting, difficult things to say out loud, because I was much more raw. This is probably about 2 years ago. I'd never really performed. I think it was the first time I actually performed at all was a slam. And everyone was lovely. Everyone was like, "Whoa, everyone was, giving it all of that." And then the thing that got me was I went to the toilet, and Lulu will know this. Well, you'll know this too, Tom. There's always a 10-mile queue for the ladies' toilet. So I was stood in the queue for the toilet at the half-time break, and no one spoke to me. No one said anything, and I don't know what my face was doing, because I have an unfortunate face. You'll have seen it several times during this, probably, where I've just been like looking like I really hate you or something, and my face just does stuff. I don't know. It's not my fault, but so maybe I just had a face on, but nobody said like, not even are you all right, because I wouldn't have wanted that, but no one said, oh, how are you finding it then, or just some chit chat. It was like they were scared of me because I'd got up and said, because there's sometimes I think I didn't try, there was a lot, there was a sigh. I can feel sometimes in a room the quality of the silence changes, and you can feel people kind of go, like, whoa, that's a bit strong. And what it is they're worrying about me. And it's like, I'm all right. I couldn't do this if I wasn't. I couldn't stand here if I wasn't. I'm okay. You don't have to for me. That's you. That's fine. So that was why I didn't like it, just because I felt like it wasn't, and it was no fault of anybody's, but I think the audience didn't know how to treat somebody who was doing sad stuff, because it's a competition So you're there to be, well done. And you can't really say well done to a woman who's just said that they think they're a dreadful person, and
That's a really interesting distinction.
Yeah. So we did. So 9 Lives poetry is it's 9 lives as in a cat's got 9 lives. So we started out. So I started out with a brilliant poet from Sheffield called Tom Juniper, and Tom helped get the night going. So Tom knows all the people on the poetry scene. I didn't know anyone in Sheffield because I'd not really done it before. So Tom hosted it as well to start off with. So they are like a very experienced poet and a host, and very, very good at all of that sort of thing. So we started at a cafe called Cafe Number 9, which was one of the reasons it was 9 Lives. And then we're both massive cat fans. So that was the other reason. But the final reason is the format. So we have 7 slots every month for open micers. So people just fill in the Google form and say, yes, I want to do open mic. This is what my pronouns are. This is my intro kind of thing. So they tell me how to introduce them and stuff. So we have 7 people doing open mic, and then we have 2 sort of paid performers. And they're usually an up and coming kind of local person, and then somebody who's like a nationally recognised poet. So we were talking about Michael Pedersen earlier on. So Michael's played 9 Lives poetry. Michael, not only did Michael play it, but he brought Holly McNish with him as well. But she actually came as well. And Michael, bless him, he's such a beautiful human, said, "Oh, you can put Holly on the poster, and more people will come if you put Holly on the poster." So I put Holly on the poster, and we did make a profit of. We made our only profit that we made ever this year on that one, which was £65 profit we made, and I spent it all on sweets, and I enjoyed myself buying lots of sweets. But so we've had Michael, we've had Helen Mort, we've had Toria Garbutt, who else have we had? Kevin P. Gilday I've mentioned. We've got Will Harris is our next poet coming up. And Will is playing with a really amazing Sheffield poet called Beth Davies, who's just won a New Poets Award. We've got Andrew Macmillan is coming in October, I think it is. So I don't know how I'm doing this. If anybody wants to know, I don't know. I just go up to people with a cat on my hand and go like, "Do you want to come and play a poetry night?" And usually they say yes, because poets are lovely. Poets are really nice,
Yeah, I'd like to see a recording of that sometime.
you honestly
captures you.
The easiest one was Michael Pedersen by a country mile, because his new book's called The Cat Prince. So he, as soon as I even got him, he was, just show him a cat, he'll do anything. In my head, the most difficult one was Will Harris, because I don't know Will very well yet, but Will appears to be quite a very serious, sort of sensible person. Like when he read, he's got a book out called Brother Poem, which is incredible. And he was reading from Brother Poem at the Verve Poetry Festival. That was where I came across him. And I was a bit scared. I was like, shall I show him the cat? Maybe I shouldn't show him the cat. I was like, I don't know if he's going to like the cat. And he was all over the cat. He was just like, what a great cat.
So you were at Verve Festival as well. Yeah, we were there.
Yes, I must have missed you guys somehow. Because Devjani told me she'd been and done your podcast, I think on the Sunday, I think it was. She mentioned.
Yeah, we were there Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah. It was amazing. Wasn't it good? It was so good. Yeah. I was just hyper the entire festival, because it was just like, everything's so good. I can't do it all. I want to do it all. Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, should we round out the episode with another poem?
So this poem, Wild Swans, was written about a place called Saxion in Sweden. Saxion just means axe lake. Me and my husband went to stay in a log cabin near Stockholm, and I did a lot of wild swimming. So that's the setting of this poem. So Wild Swans. The swans are tired of this cold place. They have gathered sleekly on the shore, their black feet the colour of boiled nettles. Some drift in the shallows, some have young. I want to be here Instead, I orbit what I lack. I beat my wings at the swans, then they beat theirs back. On edge, my husband Tom takes photos while I creep in, so I can experience my life with me in it. Remember nice things we've also done. I want to be here. Instead, I orbit what I lack. I beat my wings at the swans and they beat theirs back. I'm sculling, ironically I think, legs trailing behind me, knees bobbing slackly on the surface, the only part of me that is warm. Then 11 swans fly over, singular, against the sky, the sun glinting on their crowns, sloughing off their nettle socks, their gift to me. Don't dwell on pain. I beat my wings at the swans and they beat theirs back. We are all swans now, breaking into cloud vapour skin. It once made us howl, the plunge into cold. It can't hurt us more than it already has. I beat my wings at the swans and they beat theirs back. I feel a trembling peace begins somehow in the middle of this Swedish lake. So I flow through the water back to Tom, part woman, part swan. Thank you.
That's wonderful and marvellous.
Go off stage again. Hello. Thank you very much. Yes.
Something graceful to end the episode of. That's lovely.
This I know it's in the middle of the pamphlet, but that's why I wanted you to read it at the end, because I feel like it's the only poem that has a relationship with an animal, and in a way it kind of transcends your thoughts and who you can be as well. I don't know, to me there's something about it that has some kind of inner peace to it, you know. It's like coming to terms and feeling free. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it was a true story that I was, because I love swimming, and I loved it in Sweden because there's so many lakes. I live in Sheffield, where we have loads of reservoirs because it's an industrial city. So they built a lot of artificial sources of water to so that we could run steel, so we could create steel basically, and for the turbines to turn. So we're not allowed to swim in the reservoirs. You're not supposed to swim in the reservoirs, whereas in Sweden it's like everyone's swimming in the lakes. And the beating your wings is the kind of, you know, when you lay on the back and you do that with your arms. So I was doing that with my arms and looking up in the sky, and all these birds were flying over and they were kind of doing it above me. And it was just, you know, sometimes in your life where you just go, I will always be here. I'll always be in this moment. Like it's such a strong feeling. And it was just the kind of waving at them, and they were waving at me, and I could hear the wings beating because it was so quiet where we were. And it was just like, and I did think, and obviously I didn't have a pen and paper handy, but it was such a kind of massive image that I just thought, I'm writing about this. This is something.
It's funny, I've got a similar experience on the lake in the top of the mountains in the Pyrenees. Brilliant. As you say, it's the kind of place where you know you're always going to be there. You can always mentally go back, you know.
I want to go back. The only problem is, I think if I ever go back to that particular lake, I'll just be really disappointed if it doesn't happen again. I'll just be like, where are they? Come on, I'm here. They should be here.
Just be waiting all day.
I'd be like, come on, you know, where are you?
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. And it was really nice going through your poems and hearing your thoughts around the construction of them and the meanings behind them and all the ambiguities.
It's been a pleasure.
And I hope you enjoy listening to the episode, and see you next time.
Me too.
Reste deux femmes et un parapluie au coin de la rue, papotage féminin. La brume rire. secoue ses cheveux. De l'autre côté de la rue, l'homme les observe, de loin, de dos.
Thank you for listening to Poetry to Your Ears.
Seulement son sac à dos pour les imprimer.
This podcast is published as a newsletter on Substack. All of our content is published for free, but if you would like to support our work, you can become a paid subscriber. This will help us support transcripts for the deaf and hard of hearing community, and anyone who would benefit from reading the podcast alongside hearing it. You can also support us for free by rating the show on Spotify and Apple Podcast or writing a review on Apple Podcast. Share the show with your friends, fellow poets and poetry lovers. If you want to interact with us, you can follow us on @poetry2yourears on Instagram and @poetry2 on Twitter, or you can also write a comment on Substack. If you're American and you're listening to us, send us a message. Half of our listeners are American. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time!